Hi guys, it's Kevin Al from Infinite Wealth. On today's video series on the Walmart 401k, this is part 3. We're going to be working on custom tailoring the portfolio built just for you.
Where did you...
This is a third part in the video series on the Walmart 401k. If you did miss part 1 or part 2, I would suggest that you go back and check out those videos. Part 1, we looked at your asset allocation, the important decision that is, which can affect up to 80% of your investment returns. In part 2 of the video, we went through the different investment options that are available to you in the Walmart 401k plan. If you are unfamiliar with those investment options, go back, check out video 2. On today's video, part 3, it's going to get kind of fun. This is where we actually start to build your portfolio with your different investments that we discussed in part 2. Bear with me, it's going to be a little bit fun. We are going to have to do some math, but trust me, it's very simple math. I will help you through it, and we'll kind of talk through the different decisions that you need to make in order to have the perfect portfolio for you. All right, guys, here we go. This is the portfolio construction. This is fun. This will be some math, but it's going to be pretty easy math. I'm going to kind of walk you through it here. I made about 12 different portfolios just real quick, just to kind of show you the thought process and what you want to think about when you make your own portfolio. In all the examples I used a 70% US, 30% international split for the stock portion. You can use your own percentages and easily calculate to fit your situation. So I will show you how to do that. In general, I would recommend at least 25% for international, and then probably no more than 50% international. So 50% US, 50% international. I do use, in my other portfolios, I use 60% US, 30% international. Then I use 10% REIT, which is real estate equity investment trust. So that's basically like a real estate holding. That is my protection for deflation. Now I use 70% US, 30% international in my 401k because I do not use the real asset fund. In my other portfolios, I have them allocated to 60% US, 30% international, and 10% REIT, which is real estate equity index trust. That's not available in your 401k. The closest thing that you do have is that real assets fund. I just choose not to use that fund in my 401k. So first up, some pretty simple portfolios. We'll call these core 3. First portfolio is a 80% stock, 20% bond. This would be a riskier portfolio. Remember, as in the old videos, the more percentage you have in stocks, the higher your risk is. So this would be for a younger person or somebody that's pretty risk tolerant. So since you have 80% stocks, 20% bonds, if you go just 20% in your bond fund, that's where you get the 20%. And then if you take 80 times 0.7, because you're going to do 70% US. Now for your Russell 1000, you have 56% in this example portfolio. Since you're having a total of 80% in stocks, if you just take 80 minus 56, that will give you your 24% for your BlackRock International. This is a very low cost, very efficient portfolio. This is a great start portfolio. Anybody that's just getting started out or wants something very easy, you only have 3 funds in this portfolio. It will be very easy to maintain, and it will return a very decent amount of money over time. Next up, we have the same portfolio, but I just adjusted the numbers for 70% stocks, 30% bonds. So if you look at the bond fund, we have 30% in the bond fund. And then since we're 70% stocks, 70 times 0.7, because we're 70% US, 30% international, that's where you get the 49%. Then if you take 70 minus 49, you get 21%. So as you can see, this is pretty simple math. A second grader could do it. So you have a pretty solid 70-30 portfolio, 49% Russell 1000, 21% BlackRock International, 30% bond fund. Next up, we have a 60-40 stock bond portfolio. So your bond portion, we're just using the bond fund at 40%. You take 60 times 0.7. You get 42% for your Russell 1000. You take 60 minus 42, that gives you your remainder of 18%, and that goes into BlackRock International. And I'm just using round numbers here. So whatever asset allocation you did determine from the first video, it could be any number. So this one could be 52% stocks, 48% bonds. It doesn't really matter. The calculations are all the same. So if it was 52% stocks, you just take 52 times 0.7. Since we're doing 70% US, 30% international. This example, 50% stocks, 50% bonds. We'll spare you the calculation. It is Russell 1000 at 35%, BlackRock International 15%, bond fund 50%. So as I've talked before, this is a pretty solid portfolio for someone that's later on in their career. Since you do have 50% bond exposure, you have 50% in stocks, so you would think in a severe market downturn, you'd have somewhere around a 25% loss in this portfolio. So if you had $100,000, it would go to $75,000. Now, if we go back up to the 80-20 portfolio, this is a lot more aggressive portfolio. So you only have 20% bonds. So you could have up to a possible 40% loss in this portfolio with a down market. So your $100,000 would go to $60,000 potentially with this portfolio. So you see how the percentages, they do make a difference in your returns. The next video, we will actually go through some expected returns calculation and some other calculations to know how much you'll want to put in over time. Okay, next up we have a little bit more complicated portfolio. If you remember the Russell 1000, that's the largest 1,000 companies in the country. You can kind of make a total U.S. stock market fund by using these approximate numbers. So your Russell 1000, 81%, small mid-cap fund, 11%, and your Russell 2000 at 8%. Remember, your Russell 2000 is the 2,000 smallest companies in the country listed on the stock exchange. Okay, now the calculation is a little bit more complicated here, but it's still very manageable for anybody. So we're at an 80% stock, 20% bond allocation. So your bond fund, 20%. We're still sticking with the same 30% international. So if you take 80 times 0.3, you have 24%. Now remember on the previous fund, we had the Russell 1000 at 56%. So at that one, at 56%, if you take 56 times 0.81, we're rounding here, that gives you approximately 45%. Then if you take 56% times 0.11 for your 11% small mid cap, that'll give you approximately 6%. And then finally, if you take your 56% times 0.08, that will give you your 5% for your Russell 2000. So in the end, this stock portfolio ends up being 45% Russell 1000, 6% small mid cap, 5% Russell 2000, 24% BlackRock International, 20% bond fund. Next up, we have the 70% stock, 30% bond. Same portfolio, so you do the same calculations as before. So in this one, your Russell 1000 is 40%, small mid cap is 5%, Russell 2000 is 4%, BlackRock International 21%, bond fund 30%. Next up, we have the 60% stock, 40% bond portfolio. As you can see with this one, we have the Russell 1000 at 34%. We have small mid cap fund at 4%, Russell 2000 at 4%. I rounded both those numbers. BlackRock International at 18 and your bond fund at 40. And then finally, we have the 50% stock, 50% bond. We have the Russell 1000 at 28%, small mid cap at 4, Russell 2000 at 3, your BlackRock International at 15%, your bond fund of 20%. So why did we do this? Why did we want to go through the extra work of doing this? In this example, we're doing this really to get more of a true picture of the U.S. economy. So you're trying to split up and make a total market fund with the funds we have available in the 401k. This should actually increase your returns over time. Now keep in mind this isn't like a month of time or 6 months of time. We're talking about 7 to 10 year periods. So if you hold this asset allocation and run a 50% stock, 50% bond with this allocation, over time it should outperform just your 50% stock, 50% bond core 3 portfolio. And then next up on the portfolio, we're going to add in an international split. So what we're doing for that is we're taking a market approximation portfolio, which we had before, so the US will all stay the same. But now we're just splitting 66% into the BlackRock International, which is a index fund, and then we're taking 33% into international equity. I just picked these numbers arbitrarily for the example. You don't need to use these exact numbers, but my thought process is the BlackRock International is an index fund. Over time, those will tend to outperform an international equity fund that is actively managed, which ours is in our 401k. But that international equity fund has some other coverage, invests in some other things. So if you do just do BlackRock International, you're not getting the whole exposure that you would in the international equity fund. So you could split them 50-50, 75-25. My only recommendation is probably go heavier on the BlackRock International as long as you're not at 50-50. So it is the same calculation, but in this 80% stock, 20% bond, we had 24% international. So you just take 24 times 0.66, you get 16, and 24 minus 16 is 8. And then do notice that all these add up to 100%. When you go to actually put these in on the benefitsml.com website, they will have to add up to 100% for your portfolio. We won't go through the calculation again, but 70% stock, 30% bond. We're at 40% Russell 1000, 5% small mid cap, 4% Russell 2000, 14% BlackRock International, 7% international equity, 30% bond. Then the same thing for your 60% stock, 40% bonds. We have the Russell 1000 at 34%, small mid cap 4%, Russell 2000 at 4%, BlackRock International is at 12%, international equity at 6%, and then your bond fund is at 40%. And then the final portfolio we're going to go through today for an example is a 50% stock, 50% bond portfolio. This one has the Russell 1000 at 28%, small mid cap at 4%, Russell 2000 at 3%, BlackRock International 10%, international equity 5%, bond fund 20%. Depending on your age and your risk tolerance, you can add in a percentage of cash, the BlackRock Money Market Fund. We have talked about this in previous videos, but if you're 5 to 7 years from retirement, you do need to have a certain amount of cash on hand, just so when you're withdrawing money, and if it happens to be a down market year, you're not pulling money out of the market when it's down. You'll just pull out of the cash account. And then the same thing, you can use that money if you have a allocation to cash. Now, if the market does happen to go down 25, 35, 40%, you can put that cash into the market and you can buy more shares because they're going to be at a lower cost to you. So over time, this strategy can help increase your returns. This is a little bit more advanced move. We'll talk about that in some future videos also. And then just a note, up to 10% of your equity portion can be into the real assets fund. So that's for your inflation and deflation protection. I didn't build that into the sample portfolios, but if you wanted to, you do 60% US, 30% international, and 10% in the real asset funds. So if you had an 80-20 stock bond portfolio, your real assets would be 8% in that example. So you just take 80 times 0.1. Or you can tilt more to a small cap percentage to increase your long-term returns. The Russell 2000 over time should return higher percentage than the Russell 1000 because the Russell 2000 is smaller companies. Now do keep in mind that this is over long periods of time, so 10 plus years. It can go years on end where the Russell 1000 returns more. So that's why it's very important that once you do pick your asset allocation, you need to stick with it and then just make minor tweaks as you get older. Then finally, I'm going to share my personal Walmart 401k portfolio. Just keep in mind that this portfolio fits my risk tolerance and my situation, and it's just more for illustrative purposes only. I'm going to kind of tell you why I did the things I did, what other factors went into my portfolio. I do not add the real estate assets of the 10% in my 401k. We have other portfolios, so we hold these in other accounts. So I just added that 10% into the U.S. equity. So I run a 70% U.S., 30% international. And you can use an international range anywhere from 15 to 50% for your portfolio. So you just need to decide how much of your money that you want invested outside of the U.S. In my other accounts that are invested with 60% U.S., 30% international, 10% REITs, that is a 2/3 U.S. to 1/3 international split. So that is what I use across all of my accounts. So finally, here it is, as promised. This is my personal account for the Walmart 401k, how I have my money allocated. Just a few things about me personally. I am 45 years old, but I am very risk tolerant. So my reasoning behind the high stock allocation for my portfolio is that I am risk tolerant. And then also the 6% company match. I keep both of our 401ks, and my wife actually is a government employee, works for the VA, so she has a TSP or thrift savings plan. We run both of those at 80% stock, 20% bonds. There is a match component in both of these, so you're getting 6% of your pay in as match. The TSP does not match as good as that, but that is free money, and we want that money to compound with our own money. So we try to have as high of returns as possible in our 401ks. And then with our Vanguard accounts, we do have a higher percentage of bonds. So overall, I'm at about a 75-25. If you do 110 minus my age, I should be at a 35. I am risk tolerant, and then with my wife working for the federal government, she does have a pension that she will receive. Now that I've kind of went through the reasons that I have the 80% stock, 20% bond portfolio, let's look at how I actually break down each of them. So the U.S. domestic equity at 56%. So if you take 80 times 0.7, that gives you 56%. My Russell 1000, I have that at 37%. And what I do is I take a baseline number and then I kind of tweak them, because what I do is I do tilt for small. So I actually set my Russell 2000 at 15% because I wanted a higher percentage of small caps to increase my overall return in the 401k. I did the basic market approximation for the 4% on my small mid cap. So I just took 15 plus 4 is 19. So you have 56 minus 19 is where I got my 37%. Now, if you actually do the calculation on my portfolio, so the U.S. domestic equity, the 37% in the Russell 1000 is actually 2/3 of my portfolio. So I do have a pretty heavy weight to the Russell 1000. But as I said again, I am tilting for the Russell 2000, so that's why the Russell 1000 is lower and the 2000 is higher in my portfolio. International, I have the 80% times 0.3 because I have 30% in international, so that gives me 24%. And I just decided to split them, BlackRock International for the 66% and international equity at 8%. So I've got 16% in the international BlackRock, and then I've got 8% in international equity. And the bond fund is at 20% in my portfolio. I just keep it very simple in the 401k. The bond fund that is available to us is a very fine fund, performs well. So I just keep 20% of my bond in the portfolio. So that kind of sums up just the percentages of where I've invested at in the 401k. Okay, thanks guys for sticking with me through that part of the video. Your portfolio allocation, it's really kind of fun. You get to build this portfolio. I've actually ran this exact allocation for about 10 years. It's done very well for me. In our next video, I'm going to go through a few things that you have to do to maintain your portfolio. You don't just put it like this and never change it. So we're going to be going through the investment policy statement, which will tell you how to operate your portfolio. There's some back testing programs, and this can help you to determine what your portfolio will return over time. So this can help you to actually play around with the numbers some too. So if you do have a certain dollar amount that you need, you can actually back into a portfolio that way too. And then finally, we're going to talk about rebalancing the portfolio. So if you remember back to the first video, your biggest determination of your investment returns is your asset allocation. So over your time, your portfolio is going to drift away from this asset allocation you set. So what I'm going to do is teach you how to rebalance it back. Then that helps to control your risk and give you the most consistent return that you can expect. And then finally, I want to thank you for just sticking with me through this entire video. The math can be a little intimidating. There's a lot of science behind what I've kind of taught you. There's been Nobel Prizes in economics awarded on all these theories behind this. So rest assured that you are building a strong portfolio that will last through time. It is kind of exciting to me. There is some science to it, but it's also kind of an art. So it is really fun to build your portfolio, make it customized to fit your risks. So again, thank you for watching this video. Please feel free to make a comment down there. Hit subscribe, like the video, I would really appreciate it. Next video, we'll be going through a few more advanced techniques, and we will see you then. Thank you.
Tell me pretty lies.